Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 8 true Airbnb horror stories based on real-life events that still haunt travelers. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Now, let's begin. I didn't go to the mountains for a story. I went because my eyes were starting to slide across spreadsheets and Slack threads like oil because I'd started seeing the same blue notification bubble in my sleep. The listing promised exactly what I thought I needed. A small cabin, self-check-in, a porch that faced a stand of pines and a stripe of sky. Quiet hours strictly enforced. I laughed when I read that. Quiet was all I wanted to buy. It took longer than I planned to get there. The highway wound into 2 lanes, then one, then something that felt more like a suggestion painted onto the edge of a ridge. My GPS kept insisting I'd arrived 3 times before the mailbox with chipped black paint and a crooked red flag finally materialized in my headlights. The host's directions were specific in that cheerful way. Keep left at the split, past the woodpile. The cabin sits under a hemlock that leans like it's listening. I didn't realize that line would stay with me. By then, the sky had gone from winter gray to that deeper metallic blue that looks like it's been sanded down. The cold climbed in through my jeans while I stood on the porch, keys jangling uselessly in my pocket out of habit, eyes on the keypad. The code the host sent was a simple pattern I could do without looking. 7149. Tap the check mark, enter the code, then the check mark again, they'd written. You'll hear a long beep and feel the latch retract. I could almost see the words in my mind while my thumb found the plastic buttons. Beep, 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 beep. Red ring. Not accepted. I tried again, slower, making sure the pad lit under each number. I wiped my thumb on my jacket. Red. The porch light picked out each swirl in the polyurethane on the deck boards, the scuffed crescent at the threshold where other feet had paused. I could hear my breath making little clouds. I messaged the host. They responded fast. So sorry. Sometimes the lock gets cranky after dark. Try pressing the check mark first to wake it, then your code. If it still won't, give it a few minutes. We upgraded last month and the hub is still finding itself. You've got this. I pressed the check mark, waited until the green ring breathed once, entered the code again. Red. The cold had worked past my coat and into the tight muscles along my shoulders. The dark around the cabin had that thick quality where you can't tell if something is in it or it's just the dark itself. I got back in the car, warmed my fingers on the vents, watched my phone bars straggle between 1 and nothing. The host sent a winking emoji and try again at the top of the hour. The system refreshes. It sounded like something I would have written to a confused user. I make systems that refresh. I tell people to try again. I know how often that's code for I don't know why. I went down to a diner, weak coffee, pie that tasted like sugar and effort, and came back after midnight in a colder, clearer quiet. The stars were sudden and close. The keypad blinked like a tiny lighthouse. I tried the code. Red. I was starting to feel embarrassed in front of an object. I told myself there had to be some schedule. Codes activating after check-in time zones mismatched, Wi-Fi drift. I considered driving back down to the town and sleeping in the car near other cars, but the idea of waking up under fluorescent lights made my stomach clench. I'd come here to breathe better. I was going to breathe. I leaned against the rail and watched my breath drift and swat itself apart. My phone clock ticked past 3:16. I don't know why I was still trying. I hit the check mark, and the pad gave a single tone. Longer, flatter than before, like a sustained note you only hear when a room empties out. I entered 7149. The ring flashed green. The lock thunked deep into the door like a bone settling into place. The handle turned easily. Inside smelled like pine pitch and faint detergent. There was the promised welcome binder on the coffee table, a woven throw, a lamp with a switch that clicked like a metronome. I went around and turned on lights, more out of ceremony than need. The quiet gathered itself up around me. The only sound was the faint residual hum of the lock's motor exhaling. It was 3:17 when I set my phone down on the counter. I told myself the exact minute was a coincidence. It was the first thing I told myself and later, one of the last things I could say without hearing how thin it sounded. Sometime after that, on the couch with my coat still on, I half dreamed of numbers that didn't add up quite right. I think the last thing I remember was the click of the lock settling again, like a throat clearing in the next room. Morning was plain, Blue heat in the cold, a deer standing at the tree line like a coffee stain you don't wipe up because it's nice. The cabin was smaller in daylight, friendlier. The binder had laminated pages and a list of house rules that mostly amounted to: don't leave food on the porch, don't use the wood stove unless you already know how, no shoes on the rugs. Please do not prop doors open, it said twice in bold, as if people were always trying to wedge the place wide like a jammed jaw. Most of the day I felt normal in a way that almost made the night before funny. I hiked a little path that looped past a boulder shaped like a bear in Cam. Back to make eggs in a pan that had cooked other people's weekends. There were smudges of fingerprints on the stainless steel hood that only showed up at certain angles. I wiped them, and they became mine. It wasn't until I was half asleep on the couch again, Netflix murmuring, that I noticed the time. My phone face bloomed like a pond, 3:11. A feeling started at the same place it had the night before, at the base of my skull where a loud office used to live. The cabin had settled into a hush that made each small sound precise. The compressor clicking in the fridge, a wind scuff under the eaves, a dry tick in the baseboard heater. I paused the show because the dialogue suddenly felt like someone talking in my ear. The felt of the couch pressed a long stripe into my forearm. I told myself to get up and brush my teeth like a person in a place that is not paying attention to clocks. I didn't get up. At 3:16 I heard it, the keypad, not loud enough to call it beeping, more like a small electronic throat clearing again, a breath taken. The porch light didn't trigger. The window to the front was a flat, dark rectangle. The sound came again, a short sequence, tap beep, like someone who knows the pattern but is too tired to care. Without meaning to, my pulse accelerated to meet it. It felt ridiculous even as it happened, like letting a metronome conduct your blood. I tried to slow my breathing, my chest stayed quick. I went to the door. There's a half moon of frosted glass above the lock, good for making shapes out of nothing. I stood there with my palm on the wood, stupidly aware of how warm my own hand was. It's an old carpenter's trick that the grain on softer wood can hold warmth. I told myself that's what I felt shifting under my palm. I don't know what I wanted to prove. The keypad chirped a longer tone. The latch inside the door made that deep thunk again. A half motion, as if the door had swallowed and then thought better of it. The noise went through my wrist and bone. There was no shadow on the glass, no movement at the seam. I wanted to say hello, and I didn't, because the silence would make my voice sound different on the other side. I waited until the quiet went too long to bear, and then cracked the door, chain on, because even a smart door still has a chain. The night stepped in with the air, colder, wetter. I smelled the kind of wet that clings to moss. The porch light was dead. I didn't touch it. I looked down and saw the damp. At first it just read as darker boards, the sheen that made your eyes slide. Then a shape resolved, a ball of a heel, the long oval of an arch, 5 separate impressions of toes that had pressed hard enough to chase the dew away. The footprint faced the door. I followed it backward over 2 boards, to the top step where another print sat, again pointing inward, angled like someone shifting their weight, bracing to try the handle. There were 3 prints in total that I could see before the dark ate the angle. I closed the door. I didn't slam it. The chain made a small sound like metal remembering itself. The knot in my stomach wasn't fear. At least, that's not the word I chose. It was the feeling you get when you're sure you left a burner on, miles from home. Something you can't set your hands on has kept working without you. I didn't open the door again until morning. The prints were still there, but different in daylight. They were negative space, really. Dry outlines where the dew had gone to make room, the boards around them glittering. They were exactly the size of my own foot if I flattened my toes like a kid, and a little narrower. I stood with my boot beside one and tried to be scientific. Roof drip, knot patterns, pareidolia, a new word I'd use in a meeting to sound like I'd slept well. I texted the host a photo and typed out 3 versions of the same question before deleting them. I sent, "Hey, the lock made some weird noises at 3 a.m. Not sure if it's on a schedule? This." Host replied, "It's normal for the lock to run a diagnostic. Glad you're enjoying the woods. Remember not to prop the door." No mention of the photo. Maybe they didn't see it. Maybe it didn't send in the patchy service. Maybe I had wanted a stranger to tell me what my own eyes misread. That night, I stayed in bed with the covers pulled up and my phone on my chest like I was trying to weigh it down. At 3:17, the keypad sang its long line and the latch dropped a fraction with the authority of a thing doing exactly what it was built to do. The sound of it met my heartbeat so perfectly that either the lock was listening or I was. I lay there counting both and didn't get to the same number twice. On the third night, I recorded it. It's funny what we believe proof will do. I propped my phone on a coffee mug on the console table, pointed at the door, a black mouth with teeth of brass, and pressed the red circle a few minutes before 3. I sat on the floor across from it, back against the couch, in a hoodie I didn't take off even though the baseboard heat made the room dry. I felt like a child at a sleepover waiting for a game to get out of hand. 15. I could hear a dog, far off down in whatever counted as a valley, barking in a dislocated way like the sound had to fight trees to find me. 3:16, the first short chirp like someone clearing a greeting. 3:17, the long sustained tone, the motor in the door chewing for breath, the latch maybe retracting a quarter inch and then recovering the way a person might when they decide not to say the worst of what they're thinking. My pulse did what it always did. I did what I hadn't done. I stood up, slowly, and put my palm flat on the door. The wood was cooler than the room, but warmer than my expectation. I could feel a vibration. It was nothing much, the kind of tremor you get when an appliance on the other side of a wall starts up. But there was no other side. Beyond this was air and slanted porch and trees that leaned in to listen. I tried to map the vibration to the rhythm of my heart, because the thought that the lock was keeping time on its own had already been tried and rejected as superstition. The sync held for a handful of beats and then broke, then reasserted. I laughed a little out of nerves, and the feeling of hearing yourself inside your own throat startled me. The recording would pick that up, I thought, proof of how silly this was. I opened the chain and eased the door an inch. The air that came in smelled like the inside of a raincoat, even though it hadn't rained. The porch light did not turn on. I didn't look for prints. I looked straight ahead into the dark and waited for my eyes to make something out of it. They didn't. The keypad gave a small, tired sound, as if my opening had made it responsible for closing. I shut the door and slid the chain, flushed and suddenly embarrassed. I didn't owe the night an explanation. On the recording, when I played it the next morning, all the sounds I remembered had been flattened and swapped. The lock noise was there, but thinner, a cheap approximation of itself. My laugh was loud and close, and I hated it. There was a whisper in the middle of the clip, faint, like breath moving across fabric. If you wanted to hear words, there were some to hear. I could have sworn it said in a voice a few seconds ahead of mine, "Not yet." I listened again and again until it dissolved into nothing but hiss. I checked out early. I wrote the host a careful message thanking them, explaining that the lock made it hard for me to relax, linking to a support article about smart hubs and NTP and time drift, as if I was doing them a favor, as if I wasn't fleeing. They wrote back a paragraph of kindness that didn't touch the specifics. "We'll be sure to look into it. Glad you got the reset you needed." The phrasing made my teeth click. Reset. Driving down the mountain. The road stitched itself out ahead of me in brown ribbon. A shadow moved beside my car for a while, my own reflection in the guardrail, until the trees swallowed me entirely. I stopped at the same diner and ordered the pie without tasting it. On a TV bolted to the wall, a baseball game from another season flickered, and the scoreboard clock flashed 3:17 left in the inning. I almost laughed again. I put my phone face down. It buzzed once with a calendar reminder for something I'd already missed. When I flipped it over, the lock screen read 3:17. It was afternoon this time. I scrolled and scrolled to make the minutes move. At home, a week later, I woke to my microwave chirping at 3:17 a.m. It has never done that. It doesn't even have a finished cycle tone. I bought it because it doesn't. Maybe a power flicker. Maybe something in the building. Maybe the apartment settling. I unplugged it and slept a thin hour before my alarm told me to get up and be reasonable in front of other people again. There is still a part of me that wants to drive back and set up sensors, take the lock apart, disprove the weight of my own palm on that door. There is another part, the larger one, that doesn't want to stand there at 3:17 and be counted. It's rare at home for the silence to be complete. I live above a bar, and the exhaust fan hum is like a tide. But on certain nights, when the city takes a breath between sirens, the quiet narrows, and I hear a sound like a latch thinking about disengaging. Nothing happens. The door does what doors do. The shadow at the bottom of it is just light failing, not feet. It would be easier, narratively, if something had happened that no one could argue with. A break-in, a photo of wet prints that anyone would have to call a foot, a video with a face. All I have is a time I didn't choose, and a lock that met my heart, where it refused to be dismissed. We says. And I check into a hotel now, I ask for a metal key, and the front desk clerk looks at me like I've asked if the carp are fresh. I laugh it off. I can laugh. I just don't book places where the door greets me by name anymore. I don't trust the welcome that waits for me in a schedule I didn't set. I don't prop doors open either. I read the rules, and for once, I listen. I took the studio because of the mirror, if I'm honest. The listing had all the right city cliches: exposed brick, a fern in a basket, a window that pretended it was a view because the street light outside did flattering things to the blinds after dark. But the smart mirror for creators felt like it was placed there specifically for me. Natural light simulation, true to tone color, guest mode enabled. I could hear my manager in my head. That'll save you an hour of white balance, like saving an hour meant you were good. It was on the far wall when I let myself in, full length and quiet, vertical like a door you could enter if you were honest with it. The building itself was a little honest in the wrong ways. Scuffed stairwell, a smell of cumin from someone's late dinner that I liked, and then didn't when it climbed into my hoodie. Unit 4B had a radiator that hissed like it was keeping secrets and a window that found a slice of sky between two brick shoulders. The mirror had a soft halo built into the edges, not bright enough to be a ring light, but enough that I could shape my face into something I recognized. There's this moment when you set up the tripod and you pull the little legs until they click, and you hear the lock tighten and you think, if I stop now, no one will know. I plugged the mirror in instead and watched the glass wake. The logo rose like breath behind the surface. Thin, white letters that didn't look like anything except money. "Welcome, guest," it said, with a small chime that reminded me of hotel elevators. Setup asked for a calibration. Stand still, step left, step right. There was a thin blue outline on me that tried to meet my shoulder. Yes, and kept almost doing it. Adjust lighting, it suggested, and then looking great, with a confidence that felt like being winked at by a stranger on the subway. When it switched to mirror mode, that thin veil of tech peeled off, and there I was, slightly cooler, slightly more symmetrical than the bathroom mirror at home ever allowed. I lifted my hand to fix a piece of hair that had decided to make its own choices. My reflection lifted hesitation into the room, a millisecond pause before it mirrored me. Not enough to call it anything, like Zoom on a bad connection. I did it again, hand up, and my other self a heartbeat behind, a latecomer to a party we were throwing together. I told myself out loud, buffering, and felt foolish and soothed in the same breath. The first hour felt like 100 small tasks executed correctly, framing the shot so the outlet didn't show, swapping to a softer shirt because the camera sees lint differently than your eyes do, wiping a print off the glass with the cuff of my sleeve, which didn't help. The mirror had hairline scratches that only caught light at certain steps and made me feel like someone else had done this, exactly this, and failed to be careful. Every time I caught the delay, it was a different length, like my reflection had a tolerance for boredom and lost it sometimes. 2 seconds, less, gone, back. I would have ignored it except for the part where my reflection sometimes chose to hold my gaze longer than I could stand, like we were waiting each other out. I've watched hundreds of hours of my own face and learned the contours of what I can bear. There's a way you can tilt, an expression you can tuck the cameras into like a sweater, but there was a tiny patient quality to the glass that wasn't me. It wanted me to keep going. It wanted me to keep to a schedule I hadn't set out loud, like the mirror somehow knew that the algorithm rewards consistency even when consistency is unreasonable. When the mirror suggested studio lighting, daylight, 9 a.m., it wasn't intrusive. It felt helpful, the way a store mirror lies in your favor. It even changed the temperature of the halo light to something that made under-eye circles look like choices. I said thank you, which is a stupid thing to do to an object, and then said it louder because I didn't like the way my voice had sounded swallowed. The delay grew teeth midway through the second afternoon. I was filming a piece about things nobody tells you about living alone. Ironic, given the way the building carried everyone else's noises like a tray. I'd put my coffee on the edge of the counter because there wasn't a lot of edge to work with. On the mirror, I raised my mug and smiled a fraction more than I felt like it. In the room, my hand stayed where it was because I realized too late I hadn't actually reached for it yet. My reflection had. The sip went in. My throat worked. It looked fine, maybe even natural. Until my palm finally touched ceramic a full beat later and found it empty. I startled enough to jangle the spoon. The real mug was still full. I could smell it. On the glass I'd already swallowed. I could draw a map of rationalizations faster than Google draws streets. The mirror is doing predictive smoothing. It's a composite of cached frames to keep the image from jittering. My brain is doing the equivalent of reading lip movements and supplying a word. I set the mug down in both places at once and championed myself for being calm. A notification blinked on my phone face down beside the tripod, a calendar reminder for a call at 2:30, except it blinked in the mirror first, a small light in the corner that made my other self glance down, scan, then tuck the phone under the couch cushion on the left like I do when I want to save myself from my own attention. In the room, the phone was still silent. when it finally buzzed. The sound felt like following orders. I started testing it in ways I told myself were scientific. I lifted my right hand only in the glass. When I did it in air, a half-second later, the mirror's hand had already started to fall. I kept my body still and watched as the reflection nudged ahead. Not much, but enough to make me feel like someone had unspooled time by exactly the length of a shrug. I moved to the closet to fetch a scarf because the street kept tugging a draft through the window. In the mirror, I'd already picked the red one. My fingertips found the blue stripes and thought for a second that maybe this was taste, not technology, until the mirror me slid the red tight around the throat of a person who wasn't cold yet. There was an overlay then, faint, that I wouldn't have noticed if the halo light hadn't dimmed. Filming schedule recommended 1:10-1:45. Reset 1:45-1:50. B-roll 1:50-2:05. Break 2:06-2:15. I hadn't entered times. I hadn't even decided whether I was doing the voiceover today or tomorrow between two appointments I was already late for. I stepped closer and the words went transparent, shy, as if I'd spooked a deer. When I stepped back to the mark the mirror had somehow known to place on the floor, tape residue in a rectangle I swear I hadn't seen, the text sharpened again. It felt like an itinerary for a trip I was already on because somebody else bought the tickets and put my name on them. I tried to call the host. "Hey, loving the space?" I lied. "Quick question, is the mirror supposed to have a delay?" The reply came as a chirp from the platform chat. "Totally normal. It does dynamic stabilization for content. If it bugs you, toggle true mirror mode in the settings." I didn't want to touch the settings. I didn't want to admit I was letting a rectangle of glass tell me when to breathe. That night, at 9:03, the mirror warmed. The light on its own, to a rising that looked like morning. The window was black. The radiator made a difficult noise. The mirror offered in text the color of fog, golden hour recreated. I stared at the place where my collarbone met my neck and thought about how many years I had spent turning my body into something that read as effort without sweat. I lifted my hand to refuse without knowing how to refuse. In the glass, I was already smiling. The sound my mouth did in the room caught up like a train finally making its platform. The first time I stopped moving on purpose, I expected the mirror to keep going without me, to prove it was all just algorithmic enthusiasm. I set my jaw and stood perfectly still. In the reflection, I watched my own shoulders soften as if I'd caved, and then, with a kind of relief, the other me stilled too. It was a swift truce, the way animals negotiate with eye contact. For a few seconds, the room had no present, and 100 little pasts and futures pressed up against the glass like fingerprints. The mirror waited. I felt like it could wait as long as I was willing to fail to be interesting. I slept badly, not because of nightmares. Those are sharp, solvable, but because I kept waking to the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own blood argue with itself. In the morning, my phone had a row of messages from people whose usernames I knew better than their faces, each a small demand. The mirror had a message too. "Good morning, guest. Suggested segments. What I do with anxious mornings. 9:20, 9:35. 3 things I learned living alone. 9:40, 10 o'clock." The fonts looked like health. The times were fine. My real schedule was no more sensible. And still, I felt held at the top of a staircase and told I could climb down when I'd agreed to how many steps. I wrote the host again. Longer this time. "Is guest mode supposed to push a schedule? I'm getting odd predictive behavior. Maybe a software update?" I attached a short clip of the coffee thing, trimmed so my face didn't look like a person trying to have a reasonable relationship with an unreasonable object. The host responded with verbiage that felt copy-pasted and then personalized with an exclamation point. "Guests love the planner. It's optional, just a recommendation. If you find any actual malfunction, we'll notify the manufacturer. Please don't alter developer settings." A smiley, a clause about liability. I stared at "guests love the planner" until the words separated from meaning and left a film of something useful. I wasn't the first person the mirror had tried to organize. Covering the mirror should have solved it. I didn't just throw a towel. I pulled the extra sheet from the wardrobe and taped its edges along the frame like I was weatherproofing a window. The room went matte. I could breathe the kind of air that doesn't smell like light. For an hour I filmed with the camera pointed away from the glass and told myself I could cut around this. In the middle of a take, my eyes drifted, the way they do when you think someone is standing behind you. The sheet had settled tighter against the mirror as if something had inhaled. The fabric outlined a shoulder, then relaxed. I told myself the radiator draft did it. The radiator has never outlined anything in my life. I left the apartment. I walked 2 extra blocks to avoid the storefronts with those tall, full windows that show you your own stride like a stranger's. In someone's car door, I watched my reflection hesitate a beat before my ankle flexed. I laughed, once, audibly, the kind of laugh that would have been a clip if I were a different person. By the time I got back to 4B, the sheet had slipped on one side. The halo light was on behind it, delicate, the way a lamp looks inside a tent. The schedule box ghosted through. Break, 3:17, 3:25. That time again, an hour scheduled to be delicate. I checked my phone. It was 3:14. I wanted to hum with stubbornness, as if that could be resistance. At 3:17 on the dot, the radiator quieted and the building exhaled and the hallway noise thinned. I sat on the floor in front of the covered mirror and told myself I wouldn't look. The sheet didn't move. That was almost worse. When I finally peeled back one corner because it felt childish not to, my face waited there like a portrait. There was no lag. The world had the flat fidelity of a hospital light. For an instant, my reflection did a thing I couldn't have invented. It didn't reference me at all. It looked not at me, but past me, through me, aligning itself to a horizon that wasn't in the room. Then it settled into place, obedient, as if caught doing the thing it really meant to do. I checked out the next morning before my last prepaid night. I told the host I had a family thing, even though all my family things live in my phone. I cleaned the counters until the sponge pilled and set the sheet neatly folded on the chair. The mirror faced the door like an animal you don't want to surprise. As I reached for my bag, the glass pulsed once, harmless, like a machine finishing a thought. "See you," the tiny chime almost said. Or maybe it said nothing, and I put politeness in its mouth because I'm more afraid of being rude to machines than I am of admitting that they don't care. When I edited the footage at home, the coffee clip was fine until it wasn't. There were frames where I moved before I started, a ghostly suggestion of a gesture that had already been made. Comments under the upload were normal except for one that was phrased like a compliment and wasn't. "Love how you always look a half-second ahead of yourself." I stabbed the block button and then stared at my own face, paused in a kind of listening. The apartment mirror I've had for years, the kind that is just glass and backing and hope, shows me exactly, which is to say imperfectly, and yet sometimes in the morose. I catch a delay that is not there. I reach for toothpaste, and I've already uncapped it. I don't post about it. There's no brand to tag. There's no help article for when your own image suggests a plan. It would be easy, I keep saying this to myself, to find the manufacturer and read threads about firmware and guest privileges and turn something off. It would be easy to file it under "I was tired, technology is messy," and call it solved. But when I walk past the glass door at the entrance to my building and see a person shaped like me inside it, waiting, not because the lag is long, but because she has decided to hold, I slow down so I won't take her by surprise. I nod the way you do when two people offer to go through the same doorway, and neither knows who should go first. I let the other me move when she is ready. It seems polite. It seems like it might matter. I book places with binders. It's a habit you get as a teacher. The love of lists, rules, laminated anything that implies someone, somewhere, thought ahead and cared enough to put it in writing. This listing had a fridge full of magnetic guides in the photos, a tidy welcome binder with tabs, and a caption that promised, "Ideal for quiet work, respectful community." It looked like a weekend I could grade in, the kind where I'd fall asleep with a pen uncapped in my hand and not wake up to the sound of my own name being said 5 different ways. The apartment was second floor, clean in that old building way where nothing is perfect but everything has been wiped with a cloth that smelled like lemon. The stairwell held the day's food, a curry from somewhere below, onions from somewhere above. Inside, hardwood polished enough that my rolling suitcase sounded like it didn't belong, a tiny table with 2 mismatched chairs, an IKEA bookshelf arranged by color in a way that made my fingers itch to put things back where they lived in the world of Dewey. On the fridge, the house rules sheet hung on a magnetic clip printed on cardstock with a cheerful serif, the title in a rounder font that had hearts over the eyes. Welcome, House Rules. The first line, quiet hours, 10 p.m., 7 a.m. There was no shoes on the rugs. Dishwasher is tiny, only run when full. Please do not rearrange books. Please do not use the back stair after sunset. The after sunset made me picture a narrow flight with a city of secrets underneath it. I filed it under quaint. I messaged the host a hello, got a chipper, "So glad you made it. Let us know if you need anything. Please review the house rules carefully." The phrasing sat a little formal for the tone, like a smile that shows too many teeth. I unpacked the way I unpack in other people's places, a little at a time, socks rolled, papers stacked in order of dread. The radiator made small patient sounds. I made tea in the smallest pot I've ever boiled water in, stood with my hip against the counter, and read the rules out loud in teacher voice just to hear the cadence of them. It was almost comforting. I write rules for a living. I enforce them even when I'm tired. It was nice to be the person being told what not to do for once, like I could leave my vigilance on the sofa with my scarf. I slept in a bed that sank deeper on one side in a way that reminded me how many people had done this exact sleeping, in this exact arrangement, with the window cracked 3 fingers to let the street put itself in your ear. The mattress springs spoke their own small grammar as I turned. I woke once to the elevator talking to itself down the hall, hen again to the sound of a pot lid settling its metal against metal in the cabinet, which made no sense unless the building keeps its own pantry of noises and lends them out at night. Morning made everything uninteresting again. Light from the east through a sheer curtain, the kind that makes the dust look organized. I shuffled to the fridge for milk. That's when I noticed the new line. I would have sworn the night before there had been 8 bullet points. Now there were 9. Still, quiet hours, 10 p.m., 7 a.m., but directly beneath, in the same helpful font, please keep bathroom door ajar after shower to prevent moisture buildup. Maybe I'd missed it. Steam had made the mirror gummy and the window sweat a little, so it was reasonable. I propped the door, obedient, and told myself not to feel watched. I went out for a walk with my grating, because grating is a thing you can do in public to prove to strangers that your life has a shape. I sat in a coffee shop with a pear tart that flaked in a generous way and put green check marks where red ones would have been mean. When I came back, the apartment had that held breath of any place left empty and relieved to be done being that. My shoes made quiet spots on the rug near the sofa. I noticed only because the second night the rules changed again. Quiet hours, 9:30 p.m., 7 a.m. The end time stayed the same. The start time was earlier by a small, precise degree. I stared at it the way you look at your own handwriting and don't recognize it for a second. I hadn't misremembered. I don't misremember lists. I take pictures of them for sport. I checked my camera roll. I hadn't taken a picture. I told myself I was projecting some end-of-term mania onto a piece of paper and that the host probably printed a new version and tucked it in while I was at the cafe because they were conscientious and update forward. I wrote 9:30 and in my notebook like a student so that later I wouldn't be the kind of person who argued with a magnet. It sounds like I'm building to something that broke loudly. It never did. The changes were quiet, a degree here and then there, the way you can end up on the wrong street if you keep taking slight rights and tell yourself you're still basically going straight. On Saturday morning, the house rules grew a line that was weird only if you thought about it too long. Kindly avoid humming after dark. I laughed because who hums rules into existence? Then I caught myself humming while I did dishes, something shapeless, more breath than tune, and the faucet shuddered in a staccato I could have sworn matched me. It wasn't an answer. It wasn't anything. The pipe coughed. The hum moved into the drain, a low vibration that made the flatware sing against porcelain, and a neighbor on the other side of the wall knocked 3 times, the way you knock to ask someone to keep it down without being a person who writes down a complaint. I put the sponge down like it had become an instrument and folded my lips around my own noise. The room felt relieved. By noon, another bullet. Please do not leave shoes by the door. In the photo from the listing, 3 pairs of shoes rested under the coat hooks like obedient dogs. The night before, mine had made their own small camp there. I pictured the host reviewing a security feed and hating my clumsy boots and decided I wouldn't like that version of this story. We do adjust rules based on guest feedback, the host wrote back when I asked whether the sheet was current. Please review each morning. The sentence felt like it was trying hard to sound like what a person would write when the truth was that nobody human wrote it at all. I told myself I was being unfair. People automate. Automation helps. I moved my shoes to the bedroom out of courtesy, and because the idea that the rules might continue changing if I didn't obey made my shoulders feel the chaise, the way they do during a fire drill. The bookshelf bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Books organized by color are lovely for photos and impossible for finding anything. I caught myself standing in front of it with 2 paperbacks in my hands, left thumb finding the break in the spine where someone else had read to the same sad middle, telling myself I could fix this for the host, gift them the order they didn't know they needed. A rule on the fridge said not to rearrange them. The rule on the fridge was suddenly sharper. Do not rearrange the books. Do not alphabetize. Do not correct. I put the paperbacks back. One of them leaned as if offended. At dusk, the radiator changed its mind about who it was. Instead of the usual steam rattle like distant applause, it wheezed a thread of sound I know too well. My last period class, humming under their breath when they're restless. It sat there, a long, thin tone under the evening like a tea kettle too far away to manage, and wove through the spaces around the rules until both felt the same. Not quite music, not quite law, both of them soft and insistent. At 9:34 p.m., 4 minutes past the new quiet hours, the kettle refused to boil. The orange light on its base clicked on and off in a slow blink. The water almost there, like a kid holding a thought and losing it. I lifted the kettle and felt something like a magnet tug back at me from the cord. The room itself felt like it had turned its head to listen for me, deciding whether I was going to be the kind of person who makes noise when told not to. I turned the switch off and the orange light held for 3 long seconds before letting go. I tested the back stare out of irritation and curiosity, which are the same thing when you've been told no. The knob turned and a band of cold air snaked around my wrist. The smell beyond was very particular, wet wood and a hint of something metallic, like a basement where nails have rusted in their teeth. The rule said not to use it after sunset. It didn't say not to look. The dark music of a stairwell that goes a long way down pressed up and reminded me of a school after hours. The width of the hallway stays the same, but the distances seem to lengthen. I closed it. The latch fit back with a small click like a gate deciding which side of itself is inside. The most unsettling line came Sunday morning, precise in a way that felt like a finger laid along a throat. Curfew tonight, 9:17 p.m. There was no end time, just the 1 hour we all recognize without being told to because it's the time the day starts to make its arguments. Below it, a final bullet with a politeness that felt learned. Do not acknowledge unlisted guests. If you hear a name, ignore it. Do not invite. I am good at ignoring. I ignore my phone at dinner. I ignore hallway dramas until I'm in them on purpose. I ignored that line for hours by not being in the apartment. At 8:58, I came back from a long walk around blocks I'd never noticed before and set my graded stack on the table like an offering. A minute later, I heard the sound of sneakers flapping against linoleum somewhere not outside and not inside, but adjacent. Then a voice I know too well, boy tired, rehearsed casual, said my last name as if he'd just discovered it. It wasn't a question. It was how they say it when they want permission to talk and also to look cool, a drawn half-syllable and then the rest. The voice was where the back stairs should be if you made a map out of air. My mouth opened. The rule on the fridge held its edge. I closed my mouth. The sneakers flapped again, closer this time, and stopped. There's a kind of silence that belongs to children when they've decided they're going to do the thing anyway. That silence ballooned out and touched my elbow. I sat very still and looked at the place where the magnets clipped the page and it tried to count them. When the clock rolled past 9:17, the air loosened. I exhaled in a way that made me hear how quiet my own restraint had been. The last morning, the house rules sheet felt heavier in my hand even though it was no different cardstock than before. The clip pinched back like a crab. The bullets had swollen to fill the page, specifics that had never been there, not in the neutral tone the original rules preferred. Return red pen to drawer. Don't leave mug on nightstand. Please do not open the cabinet under the sink. No chairs facing the window. Please do not correct mistakes in this apartment. The last line made my jaw do something involuntary. Correcting is how I love things and how I ruin them. I tell myself there's no difference. I decided, because human beings are badly engineered when it comes to following directions, to turn the chair toward the window. I did it slowly, a tiny defiance, a way of touching the line without smudging it. The chair legs whispered across wood. The pane rattled once as if a truck had gone by. There was no truck. A pigeon landed hard on the outside sill, wings slapping, and peered in with the round denial of a city bird that has never lost anything and doesn't plan to. I turned the chair back, apology as furniture, and the window took a breath and settled. I smiled without humor. Point made. Under the sink felt like an obvious dare, which would have been enough to make me ignore it, if not for the fact that ignoring counts here as obeying and I wanted to know which one I was doing. I opened the cabinet slowly. The first thing that hit me was bleach, the petty version of it that smells like grocery aisles and not hospitals. Then the wet copper coin note of a pipe that doesn't leak so much as think about leaking. A small white plastic bucket waited, empty. The underside of the sink had what looked like pencil marks. Our case at first, 3 short lines and a longer one, and then the longer I looked, the more I saw that if you wanted to read them as letters, the letters were there, half-formed, as if to write a word, and then remembered the rule about writing in the apartment and stopped. I shut the cabinet with more care than necessary and wiped my palm on my jeans because it felt like I'd put my hand somewhere that would remember me. I cleaned like a person who wants points. The tiny dishwasher did its best and left everything hot and a little less than clean, which I decided was honest. I made the bed with an awkwardness born of using someone else's corners. I held the "do not correct" line in my mouth like a lozenge and let it dissolve. When I signed the guest book, I kept it simple. Thank you, quiet and comfortable, great location. I didn't mention the fourth grade cursive beside my entry that had tried to make a heart out of an A and then crossed it out hard, or that someone had underlined, "Please do not use the back stair," and written in tiny neat print, "Makes sense." I didn't mention that I've never been so aware of how many ways a room can ask you to behave. I messaged the host to say I was leaving an hour early. "Family thing came up," I wrote, and pressed send before I resented myself for the small lie. "Thank you for respecting our house rules," came back immediately. "We adjust in response to guest needs. Safe travels." There it was again, the sentence that feels algorithmic even if a person types it. I thought of a spreadsheet cell that says, "If guest hums, then add bullet. If guest has red pen, then..." And then decided I didn't like how easy that made it. I left the keys in the lockbox with fingers that stuck slightly to cold metal and felt watched in the way everyone does when they take a last look back at a place, even if nobody notices. Driving home, I realized I was obeying the rules of the road with a religious intensity that made the car behind me choose a different lane. It was ridiculous, the way my body accepted suggestion like a student DS. Spirate for gold stars. I stopped at a rest area and caught my reflection in the metal of the paper towel dispenser. Blurry, obedient. A sign above the sink read, "Employees must wash hands." My hands moved as if they had always belonged to someone else's instructions. Back at school, the first morning after the trip, I stood in front of my whiteboard and wrote our class rules in purple, like I always do. Raise your hand to speak. Listen without interrupting. Open mind, open book. The pen squeaked in a way it doesn't usually. The room felt, nothing occult, nothing I could be mocked for, just attentive, like an apartment taking notes. A student called my name from the hallway in the voice he uses when he's about to ask for an extension he already knows I'll grant. It caught at a frequency that lives in stairwells and made the tiny hairs along my arm rise in a pattern that was, embarrassingly, alphabetical. I shook it off. I am good at shaking things off. I am statistically excellent at it. Everywhere there are rules. I knew that. I teach that. Now I read them like they are talking to me personally, and sometimes they are. Keep off grass, and the small path of flattened blades that shows where everyone walks anyway. No food in the classroom, and the crumbs I sweep up after the club that needed to meet at lunch because they didn't have anywhere else to go. Do not prop doors, in bold, and me with a book in my hand, ready to wedge, deciding not to, feeling the building unclench. At home, my to-do list has started to grow items I don't remember writing, in my handwriting, with my impatience. Lock windows by 9:17. Don't answer if you hear your name at the door. No shoes by the rug. I tear the sticky notes up and put them in the trash and then later reflexively move my boots under the bed. I filed it next to the absurd categories my brain keeps. Weird but explainable, not my business. Things you don't stick your hands into at night. The regular machines were plenty. The cycle took the standard 30. I scrolled my phone without really seeing anything and realized I'd read the same sentence 3 times, the words not sticking. When the washer stopped, my phone jumped 5 minutes backward. 4:11, then 4:06. It corrected itself, or I corrected it by blinking. Basements have a way of eating signal and spitting it back with teeth marks. I put the clothes into a dryer, fed it $2 coins, and watched the drum turn once, pause, turn again like it had to remember how. The hum of it had a thread through the middle, just a slightly different frequency that pulled at me the way a voice can pull at you in a crowded hall when your name is in it. I shook it off. Noise is noise, until it isn't. I finished with folded stacks that looked like I had my life in hand. I went up the stairs with a bag on each shoulder and my body in that particular post-shift state where you're both too alert and already underwater. On the landing, my eyes flicked back to the corridor where the arrow pointed. There was another arrow I hadn't clocked, lower down near the floor, smaller, as if someone had added it later for emphasis. Extra machines indeed. I told myself I'd be grateful for overflow on weekends when everybody tries to own their Saturday. I told myself a lot of things I didn't believe because they were useful. The second week, pain had accumulated in the corners of days the way dust does. I took the basement stairs on a Sunday night that was technically Monday, thinking I'd be in and out before shift. The regular room was busy in the way nighttime gets busy. 3 of the 8 machines in use, nobody in sight. A single sock, grayed with too many washes, clung to the chairs. IP of a basket like it was trying to climb back in. The corkboard had a new notice. Please respect quiet hours. 11 p.m., 7 a.m. No laundry runs that end after 11. The tone was warm, like a teacher asking nicely. The time made me wince. My cycles would finish at 11:12 if I started now. The building and I weren't going to agree. The extra machine's arrow looked more insistent, its edges curled slightly where steam had tried to lift it. Beside it, someone had stuck a fresh arrow, same marker, different hand. The lines shakier, the arrowhead overdrawn so it looked like a fish. I wasn't going to follow a fish into a mechanical room. Then two of the regular dryers blinked end, and the third throbbed 12 and quack in a way clocks do when they've been unplugged. When I tried to start mine, the button depressed and sprang back without any change. Again, nothing. The change machine coughed and returned my dollar coins like it had moral objections. The room's hum seemed to take one step away from me. I don't know if irritation is a better guide than fear, but it got me to the half-gloss door. The handle was smooth and colder than the air. The sign above it didn't say no. It didn't say anything except mechanical. It gave when I pushed, to the width of my palm before a chain caught high on the inside. Through the seam, a slat of light and more hum, deeper here, the kind you feel set the bones of your inner ear to work. The smell that came up was old wet wood, and behind it the suite of fabric softener, the brand with the little teddy bear on the bottle. I said out loud, "This is dumb," and my voice came back to me as if through cloth. The corridor beyond wasn't like the laundry room. It was lower, the ceiling threaded with pipes wrapped in frayed insulation. The floor had a stripe of paint down the middle like the building had once been keen on telling people where to walk. On the right, a window that looked into a smaller room held 3 older machines, the kind with knobs that click and a door you have to shoulder closed. On the glass, another arrow had been taped, inside this time pointing in toward the machines, like a hand drawing you down. The chain would keep the door from opening more than a foot, but that was enough to slide sideways into the gap if you wanted it too much. I didn't. I stood there with my laundry bag at my feet like a promise I could still back out of. Something in the deep hum slurred at the edges until it made something like a word. F-L-D, fo-eld, hold. If I wanted to hear it, it was there. I could tell you it's a known phenomenon, pareidolia, that the brain will make sense and speech out of fan noise because it can't stand not to. I could tell you the rhythmic alarms of a ward mean I will hear stay in air conditioners for the rest of my life. All of that is true. It didn't help. My phone said 10:52, then 4:03. The jump made me turn the screen off, then on, as if I could teach it better habits. A push alert from my booking app, old and useless, bobbed up as if it had just arrived. Reminder, check-in is 4:00 p.m. Contactless entry. I swiped it away. The quiet hours sign on the corkboard glowed in memory. 11 p.m. The two numbers started to orbit each other like a bit I couldn't dislodge from my teeth. In the half-glass of an old dryer door, my face trembled and steadied. I looked like a person who had been awake in too many rooms. I tugged the chain carefully and it lifted as if it had been placed for show, resting on a screw more than locking the world. The door opened enough for me to angle in, laundry dragging along my shin. The smaller room smelled older, oiled metal, lint. A roll of blue tape sat on a stool. Someone had torn pieces from it with their teeth. On one of the machines, a digital time showed 00:31. The colon blinked. I pressed start and it stayed 00:31 for a breath that took too long. Then it read 00:30, then 00:31 again like a stutter. Coins rattled somewhere behind the wall, just a single fall and then quiet. The hum arranged itself, stay. The syllable rested on my tongue without being invited. When the drum finally caught, it turned heavy. Inside, the wet weight of my scrubs rolled over on themselves like they were full of river water. The glass fogged, then cleared. The stutter stopped. The numbers ticked down with the reluctant certainty of a machine rejoining a schedule. I still had time to make my shift if I left now and came back later. Instead, I stood in the corridor and listened to a hallway above me shake its keys. Footsteps traveled overhead in a hurry, I know, that end-of-shift hurry, the lightness of hands that are finally empty. For a second I thought I heard a locker door slam, but we didn't have lockers here. We had mail slots and cupboards. The hum slid towards something that was almost my name and wasn't. I told myself I was held here by nothing but laundry and the need to pretend I wasn't following instructions written in tape. When I hauled the basket back to my apartment, it felt heavier, like the clothes had soaked up a different gravity. The fabric smelled faintly of a detergent I don't buy. Something floral with an aftersmell like a memory you can't place. I didn't add softener. I don't, because it makes sparks in hospital dryers. I folded without thinking, my hands doing the 2/3 fold for teas they learned in a linen room at a different job, and the hum of the building slipped under the door and rested at my feet. The next day I asked the super casually, while pretending to struggle with a package at the mailboxes. "Hey, is there another laundry room?" He didn't look up from the clipboard he'd wedged his jaw around. "Just the one," he said, voice clipped, the accent of a man who loves things that work. "Don't go past mechanical. Old storage, half flooded sometimes. We're sealing it off next month," he added, as if from a policy sheet. "Use posted facilities only. Quiet hours are for a reason." The last sentence felt practiced in his mouth, like he said it to everyone and no one. I tried the machines at 2 p.m. the following Sunday like I was trying daylight on for size. The extra arrows were gone. The blue tape ghosts remained, faint adhesive outlines on the paint, dust catching where corners had been. The chain sat higher on the inside of the door like a raised eyebrow. The corkboard notice now said, "Quiet hours 10 p.m., 7 a.m. The moon clip art replaced with a more officious city seal. My phone chimed and reset its mind about the hour twice while I stood there, then stuck to 2:13 like it had always meant it. The hum read as just hum. A neighbor came in with a bottle of lavender detergent and said hi without her mouth moving much. I folded with a performative care, like neat stacks could organize the part of me that wanted to go backwards down a corridor and listen to a machine tell me what to do. At the hospital in the break room, someone had put up a quiet hours 1:03 p.m. for patient rest sign on the microwave. It made me ridiculous that I flinched when I saw it, like the block letters would ask me to hold my breath. On a slow night at 10:59, the telemetry bank did a thing I've heard 1,000 times. Alarms settled, then climbed in that false positive chorus that makes my teeth go chalky. The number made me unkind to it in my head because it wasn't its fault, and the body in room 412 was fine, and the nurse at the desk used 2 fingers to press the silence in the practiced way that buys you with seconds what a machine takes for granted. I poured coffee and watched the level in the pot stutter, then correct. Fluorescent lights, eat time. Basements eat time. Hopes. Spittles live on it. I stopped using the basement at night. There's a laundromat 6 blocks away that's open until midnight, bright as a daycare, with a TV that murmurs home improvement shows into the air. I sat on a plastic chair and fought with a jammed machine and felt civilized. And still, when the row of dryers kicked into one collective purr, my ear picked out a syllable and finished it with a word. I am a practical person. My body has been trained toward it. There's no copay for superstition and no code for the feeling of being handled gently by machinery. And yet I started setting alarms at strange times so my loads would complete at 10:47 or 3:20, anything that stepped around 11. I told myself this was me being courteous to downstairs neighbors. I told myself courtesy is a superstition with better PR. One night I came home and found a small stroke of blue tape on my door frame, the kind painters leave when they forget to clean up. I peeled it off and my fingers came away with that gummy sensation you have to rub off with your thumb. I told myself it was nothing. What else could it be? I put the tape in the trash under the sink, then took it back out and pressed it flat on the inside of the cabinet door and closed the door like I was pinning something alive inside. The next morning, when I reached for the garbage bag, my hand found the tape first. It had let go and curled stickily into itself, an arrowhead formed by accident. I wrote a review when my stay ended. Good water pressure, close to hospital, laundry convenient, and saved the part I wanted to write for the private note to the host. Basement signage is confusing. Might be good to clarify where tenants are allowed. Also, my phone clock drifted in the basement. Maybe a service issue. The host responded promptly with something the platform probably helped them write. Thanks for the feedback. Guests are encouraged to use only the posted laundry. We'll be sure to update signage. Cell service can be spotty. Quiet hours help keep the peace. It's not that it wasn't true. It's that it slid off the part of me that had stood in a corridor between machine lungs listening to a voice that wasn't one. At home, months later, I can tell a regular hum from one that thinks it's language. I can tell when a phone clock is trying to behave and when it has taken a step sideways because it was asked to split itself between instruction and permission. My hamper fills on a schedule it didn't choose, the way bodies do when they're told when to sleep. When I fold now, I do it with the feeling of someone watching respectfully from the other side of a door. It feels almost like being accompanied, and I hate the part of me that reaches for that word because it makes me a little less alone in rooms where machines take care of what you can't. There's no moment I can give you with edges sharp enough to cut argument, no face in a porthole, no hand under a door, just arrows that appear and recede, a hum that learns a mouth, a clock that can't pick a lane between check-in and quiet hours. I wear my keys on a carabiner now and clip them to my belt like a janitor because it feels like a talisman against doors that open enough. I go up the stairs with clean clothes and don't look down the extra corridor because if the machines are waiting, I don't want to know what they think I need. If they aren't, I don't want to know that either. I fold. I keep the noise down. I try to deserve peace the way a building asks you to. I thought the water would be kind. Hotels make grief feel fluorescent. I booked the houseboat because the listing promised a soft dawn and a small engine and a map with an easy dotted line out to the breakwater. Perfect for a quiet morning cruise, the caption said, and the photos were full of warm rope and brass. I told myself I'd take you out at sunrise, say the words I kept not saying, open the tin, and let the bay carry what the land couldn't. The marina gate beeped when I keyed the code, a low, friendly tone, like a store that doesn't mind you coming in after hours. The air was the particular kind that sticks to your lip, salt, diesel, cedar from the pilings. Halyards tapped masts up and down the dock, a scatter of metal against metal that sounded almost organized. Slip numbers were stamped on little aluminum plates along the finger piers, 25, 27, 29, and then the one the host had sent me a photo of. 31. The paint on its 1 had been touched up in a cleaner white than the 3, like somebody kept renewing the last part more often. The boat was called Small Hours, glossy letters on a navy hull. Not a big thing, 30 feet maybe, square little cabin with windows that looked like they remembered to check in on you. The welcome aboard binder was where the listing said it would be, under the dinette cushion, laminated and grinning. Quiet hours 10 p.m., 7 a.m. Please respect dock neighbors. Lines are preset. Do not untie the starboard bow spring. It keeps the boat from walking. Midship and stern are sufficient. Fuel shut off aft. Head is manual. Please be gentle. There was a page with a dotted route drawn by a careful hand. Slip, fairway, red can, green none. Keep the breakwater to port. Idle near the day beacon. Favorite spot for morning light. I carried your ash tin like it weighed as much as a person. It didn't. I had it in a dry bag inside my backpack even too. Rain wasn't in the forecast. The host had left a note tucked in the binder's cover sleeve. So sorry for your loss. Happy to answer questions about harbor procedures. Please don't retie lines differently when you return. Harbor master gets grumpy. The phrasing made me think of a dog asleep in an office. Neighbors on 33 had strung warm bulbs along their awning and were eating late. One of them raised a hand as I stepped onto Small Hours. Early bird, huh? He said, even though it was after 9. He squinted into the cabin behind me. You two going out at dawn? Just the one of me stood on the deck. The question did what questions sometimes do, entered and sat somewhere I didn't have a name for. I shrugged like someone who didn't mind being miscounted, and he seemed satisfied to have been neighborly. Inside, the engine smelled like a faint promise of power, oil with sweetness under it. I tested the switches, found the deck light that made the slip look like a stage, checked the fuel gauge twice though the host had written half tank, more than enough for a morning. The radio was on channel 16, volume low, a microphone coiled like a snake. I touched the push to talk and didn't press it because making a radio ask for permission felt theatrical. The bed in the bow looked like sleep in a storybook. Triangle, cushion, a small porthole that would make the water a framed thing. I lay down for longer than I meant to, listening to the tact and clink of the dock, the slap of something eel-like under the hull. The whole marina spoke a language of taut rope. Around 11, I made a thermos of tea in the tiny galley, wrote a sentence in the notebook I'd brought, and crossed it out because grief looks like lies when you write it. Outside, the string lights on 33 switched off in a swift, intentional dark. The dock got small, like a hallway after a school day ends. The water burped. At the pilings, little throat sounds. I zipped the ash tin back into its case and whispered something I could live with, to you or to the room, I'm not sure. Through the window, the aluminum 31 caught a stray light and looked like it had been polished with a thumb. I made a plan. Wake before the gulls, idle past sleeping boats, follow the dotted line to the beacon, do the small careful thing I owed you. I set my phone alarm for 5:20, then changed it to 5:10, because the foghorn out on the point had a pattern that made me want to beat it. Sleep came in strips. Somewhere between them, I heard voices carry over the flat water the way sound does at night. A conversation I thought belonged to Dock 29, about a dog that didn't take to the boat well. I closed my eyes, let the marina do what towns do when no one is looking, and breathed in diesel and salt like a promise. Dawn on water is gray and peach at once. The fog sat low, not a blanket so much as cloth draped over shoulders. My breath hung in the cabin when I turned the key. Small Hours coughed, then steadied, a polite engine clearing its throat so neighbors wouldn't resent it. I loosened the midship and stern lines per the binder, left the starboard spring in place until I nudged reverse and the boat leaned against it the way a dog leans into your hand when you're about to let go. Then I slipped it, coiled it as I'd been taught, and we were out. Idling in the fairway, I kept to 5 knots in the dotted path in my head. Red right returning, I muttered like a child reciting something true, in case truth required an offering. A gull gave the kind of laugh people always think is laughter. My hands did the small adjustments, the ones you can't teach yourself, until you feel how much a hull wants to turn when you ask it. The green nun buoy nodded, its bell making a careful, indifferent sound. I passed a skiff with a man in a hat hunkered over a thermos. He lifted 2 fingers and his eyes flicked over my shoulder again as if I'd brought a shadow. At the day beacon, the world slowed. The foghorn at the point bellowed with a rhythm. 3 long, a pause, then a long, which my brain translated into an old bedtime ritual without meaning to. I throttled to idle and let small hours drift. The water had a skin like breath on glass. I took your tin out of the bag and held it with both hands because one felt like cheating. I considered speaking. The first words were brittle and performed. I didn't like them. I said your name instead. The fog absorbed it without reply. From somewhere behind me, a conversation unspooled. At first it was the kind of dock talk that lives in all marinas, whether the Nor'westers were early this year, whether the bait shop on Shore Road had changed hands. I know those rhythms the way I know chart paper. Then it bent in a way that made muscles under my jaw tighten. We should have done the ridge in September, my own voice said, the weariness and bravado of it, from a week earlier on a different couch with a window that didn't look at water. The other sentence in that conversation, your answer, followed in a tone of amusement that made the hair on my forearm lift. You had said you were always a winter person, you just didn't know it. And we'd laughed, the soft kind you do when you are trying to say something adjacent to the thing you mean. The air around the day beacon printed that laugh and floated it back to me. There was no skiff in sight now. The man in the hat had become fog. I let the ash tin rest on my knee and looked down at my phone because screens make a person brave with nonsense. The blue dot that thought it was me was in the marina, on slip 31, a little pixel pulse. The map of the bay was pinned and bright. The dot refused to be anywhere but the aluminum plate. I turned location services off and on, a childish act that felt like tidying. The radio crackled in the cabin, a skiffed few syllables. 31, copy, thin as a reed. I reached in and turned the volume all the way down because I didn't want my hands in that. I scattered a handful over the stern anyway, a test, a half measure, because grief loves half measures for their deniability. The ash took the water without drama. It didn't clump or float as people warn you it will. It became the surface, and then, not. The engine idled in a rhythm I don't know how to describe except that it matched a piece of me. The fog made a suggestion of shore and then withdrew it. I put the boat in gear with the idea of easing along the breakwater. Small hours moved forward obediently, then sideways, then forward again, like stepping carefully on stones in a river you don't know the depth of. I held the wheel gentle and purposeful. When I looked up past the cabin roof, the marina gate light was blinking on the hill in its exact stupid pattern. Slips arranged themselves into a maze that I recognized without granting that I had asked to be inside it. By the time I touched the midship line to the cleat, the aluminum plate said 31. It didn't feel like a return so much as a reveal. I nudged back out without tying, a little angry now at my own superstition. I headed for the guest dock along the public park where joggers run with neat backs and coffee goes soft in paper cups. I slid into G4 with a petty sense of triumph, looped a quick figure 8 around the cleat, and stepped onto the plank to make the knot tight. When my shoe hit wood, the wood was home dock. The plank edges I'd already memorized, the crack by the piling with the gum wrapper wedged inside. The neighbor on 33 stepped out with his mug and said, "Back already?" like it was noon and I'd given up on fishing. He lifted his mug in what I can only call a toast to a person behind me. "She ever get cold out there?" he asked. I turned fully, because I'm not fond of being haunted in the broad daylight. Geest of someone else's question. The deck behind me held air and a coil of line that had worked itself a little looser. I tugged it tight without looking at my hands. Just to be stupid, just to prove that explanations are useful even when they're the wrong explanations, I motored out, rounded the green nun, and cut the engine. Drifted on the slack, let the current work, closed my eyes to not complicate things with sight. Time did a thing that clocks don't permit. When I opened them, the marina was exactly where my body had known it would be if someone were handling me from underneath. I bumped the fenders to the dock with the softest huff, like a person being asked to keep their voice down. 31 in its brighter paint at the end of the world. I slept mid-afternoon out of sheer uselessness. I woke to the sound of my own voice in the fog again, saying things that belonged to yesterday. A neighbor's radio played a game from last season. A bell buoy chimed a sentence and stopped before the verb. I thought about rowing straight out in the dinghy with the ashes in my lap until the tide decided not to insist. I thought about how diligent a boat line can be when it wants. The welcome aboard binder on the table lay open to a page that hadn't been opened before, a friendly little flowchart. Leaving the slip? 1. Untie midship, then stern. 2. Keep spring line until ready. 3. Please retie exactly as found upon returning. I could not have told you where the binder had learned the word upon, except that paper loves old manners. The next morning I gave up on the dotted line and instead tried to outmaneuver whatever stupid physics my brain had invented. I walked the dock before sunrise with the tin in my pocket like a pocket watch. Everything was damp and assertively alive. Seaweed clung to the pilings like it was making a point. A heron stood calligraphed against pale water of A crab pot buoy clicked its little complaint against the dock. At slip 29, a woman in a red beanie fed stale bread to gulls in a way that telegraphed someone who hated what she was doing and would do it anyway. She told me she always forgets extra line. She asked, not casually, "You folks headed out this morning or tomorrow?" I didn't argue with her math. I nodded and said, "This morning," because arguing with a person about what they perceive is a kind of violence when they think they're being kind. I tried anchoring just off the fairway mouth, anchored down slow, line paid out like I'd rehearsed in my head. The line came tight like a throat, and instead of the boat settling behind the bow, the stern swung, an ugly little dance that put the hull sideways to a current I wasn't convinced existed. I hauled it all back in, arms burning, ashamed of the way bodies still need parts of you thought grief had claimed. The fog laid a hand on the bay, and the hand had my audacity in it. I set the tin on the dinette flat and sent the host a message I didn't like writing even while I typed it. Quick question, has the harbor been moving the boat between slips? My GPS is acting weird. The reply was instant and neutral. The boat stays at slip 31. Guests are not permitted to relocate to other slips. GPS can be unreliable on the water. I read stays as belongs. I read unreliable as don't argue. I scattered a little more from the swim step at the stern and the slip because it seemed worse not to. The ash took to the slosh between hull and dock and disappeared into the brown-green world like anything else that becomes water. It felt inappropriate, intimate in the wrong way, to watch it eddy against rubber fenders, to see something of you knock a plastic bumper and leave nothing on it. I told myself you would have found this funny, only I would try to do a ritual and be told by a marina to do it within posted guidelines. Somewhere a small boy threw a rock from the public park and shouted triumph, displacing a gull that made a sound I heard as complaint and someone else would hear as very gull. I checked out a day early, which felt like cheating on the part of me that loves to get her money's worth. The host said, "No problem at all. Hope you got the piece you needed." I cleaned the tiny galley until it shone like a new kitchen in a catalog. I retied the midship the way they wanted, practiced politeness with rope. When I stepped onto the dock with my bag, the neighbor on 33 raised his mug again and looked over my shoulder, the friendly acknowledgement widening to include someone I did not bring. "Safe travels," he said to the space behind me. "She'll get you home." I said thank you to the plank because it seemed a waste not to, and felt a little wind through my jacket at the exact spot a hand would go if a person were guiding you through a crowd that might not see you. At home, inland, the shower sometimes speaks in a buoy bell pattern when the water hammer gets going, and the part of my brain that wants to be reasonable bets against it and loses. I hear my own voice in the kitchen at night, lines from old calls, the nonsense logistics of who brings ice. I tell myself city pipes make vowels. I tell myself fog does that. It carries last night's words because it hasn't had time to forget them. On the train, a kid playing with the intercom said 31 into the wrong hole in a way that made a woman look up like she'd recognized a station. I laughed in the closed mouth way you do when everything is not funny and you're doing it wrong. I still have more than half of you. The tin lives in the top drawer where strings and tape measures go to tangle. Sometimes I think the water was telling me the obvious, that a place that knew you both is better than a place that takes you away. Sometimes I think it was as disallowing the sentimental version of scattering and asking for a real one, up on the ridge we never took in September, where I cannot blame a current if I can't make my hands uncurl. Sometimes I think it was nothing but current and me, proof that grief is a compass you keep misreading because you want north to be a direction that points to the past. I have a habit now at harbors. I read the slip numbers twice and then a third time as if arithmetic could save me. My eyes catch on 31 in addresses and menus and the backs of jerseys. It's not that 31 is special, it's that the aluminum plate made a promise I would not make back. There are days the smell of diesel drifting down a street that shouldn't smell like that feels like the dock took a step toward me. There are days I stand at the edge of a public pier and practice letting things go in my head until my hands are empty. When the foghorn far down the river gives one long or three, I hear you the way sound lives in water, completely, softly, insisting without touching. And when someone behind me moves in the space where a companion should be, and they are only air, it is rude not to make room. So I take one small step to the side, like I did leaving the slip, and I don't look back because you never really lived in my eyes. You lived where rope holds a boat to a place, patient and exact, and the knot is only a gesture toward the thing that does the work. I booked the place because of the desk. There was a photo of it, wide enough for 2 monitors, a window in front of it that looked out at nothing dramatic, just a pale fence and a strip of sky. I was going to be heads down for a week, my manager's way of saying, do not ping me unless there is fire. The listing promised fiber Wi-Fi, coffee gear, blackout curtains, and a digital welcome binder that learns your preferences. I rolled my eyes at the last part and then clicked reserve because a person who spends her days naming buttons for other people can't pretend smart a minute. Eyes don't work on her. The house was a bungalow with a little mean posture, all elbows, low roofline, hedges clipped too hard. Inside, lemon oil and something slightly warm like a laptop that's been asleep a long time. On the coffee table, a tablet in a leather folio, screen asleep, a white card tucked under the flap that read Welcome Binder in a font that wanted to be reassuring, the kind my team reaches for when they want compliance to feel like a hug. Next to it, the Wi-Fi instructions, neat, with a network name that made me laugh, guest not guest, and a password I typed wrong twice before getting it right. When I touched the tablet, it woke with the animation that tech companies teach us to trust. Hi, Ava. It said. I hadn't told it my name yet. Booking details, I told myself. The next line made the explanation less comfortable. We've set the desk to 40 inches high. Feel free to adjust. I looked across the room and the desk did a tiny, shamed shuffle up like it had been listening. May I tailor the house to your work hours? The binder asked. There was a blue button that said yes and a smaller gray one that said not now. I hit yes because that's who I am. I prefer knowing what the machine is going to do to being surprised by it. It offered grocery suggestions with pictures, 3 items across, a carton of the oat milk I buy, the exact brand, Fuji apples, which I like and never admit to preferring, rosemary crackers I keep as a joke because they make me feel like somebody else. Local delivery available, it added, as if it had not already creeped me out. I clicked the info icon like a rational person. We never store personal information, it said. We infer preferences based on past guest behavior at this property and anonymized regional trends. I don't live in this region. I don't like the phrase infer preferences. I do it for a living. Coffee, the binder suggested, and the screen slid to a page with a photo of a gooseneck kettle and a scale. Recommended water temp, 94 degrees C. Recommended ratio, 14.1. Grind setting, 4. The numbers were mine, not common. Too strong for most people, too fussy for others, and exactly the ones I'd written in a note to myself months ago and then deleted because it made me feel like someone who has opinions about grinders. Filters in second drawer, it added. I opened the second drawer. The filters were there, white, the brand I favor because the paper flavor rinses out clean. I told myself this was a kiosk trick, magician's patter. Houses with good coffee gear attract people like me. The overlap is just math. There was a real binder too. An actual book with laminated pages that told me to take trash to the green bin, not the blue, and not to prop doors because our hinges are custom and easily stressed. I flipped back to the tablet. Schedule, it proposed, and a grid unrolled. Focus block, 9:20, 11:10. Deep work, 1:30 to 3 o'clock. Admin, 3:15 to 4 o'clock. I hadn't entered anything. I hadn't said what I was writing or how long I could stay with it before I started checking for the kind of emergencies I manufacture when the page is blank. The times were plausible, almost flattering, like it had studied my type and given me a body that would behave. Would you like to optimize lighting for writing? It asked. 4K at 40% brightness suits your eyes. The desk lamp warmed to a glow that made the wood grain look like it had something to say. Sleep is important, the binder continued like a parent on a good day. Front bedroom gets early street light. Back bedroom is quieter. Tonight, choose back bedroom. Stay away from East Room. The vent rattles. I didn't love the tone. It didn't feel like curation. It felt like I was being handled gently by an app that had practiced. I did tour the room. Because the binder had made me curious. The East Room had a soft blue rug and a mirror that made me a little too tall, a cheap trick. When I pressed my palm near the register, a faint tremor tickled my skin. The back room was plain and less pretty, and the air there felt still in a way I wanted to call peace. The binder chimed softly like a person who approves without wanting attention. Good choice, it said. I told myself it was a default response designed to keep me from feeling buyer's remorse. I told myself a lot of things that were true enough. By evening, I'd stopped resisting and let it build a day around me. It nudged the thermostat down a degree when I moved to my laptop, warmed it back when I stood to stretch. It reminded me to close the sliding door before sunset so the house wouldn't swap its warmth for a draft. Journal tonight? It asked at 8:50, disarmingly casual. Try. What I meant to say at the meeting but didn't. Which was unfair because the title I hadn't written down, the one I'd tried not to think, was close enough to that to feel like a guess that landed too accurately. I told myself I'd given it permission. I told myself I was a lucky person with a helpful binder and a desk that lifted like a well-trained animal. I brushed my teeth, read the physical sheet about recycling without understanding a word, and slept in the back room like I'd done it 100 times. On the second day, the binder stopped being merely right and started being punctual. Shower temp today, 104 degrees, it suggested, a number I would have pegged for somebody else. City maintenance between 11:05 and 11:20 may briefly affect pressure. Don't be alarmed. The word alarm made my upper back tighten. I turned the knob to where I like it, which is a little more than hot, and the shower settled into the kind of rhythm that makes you forgive buildings for being old. At 11:06, the water hiccuped. It didn't scald or freeze. It coughed like a throat. The sound came up through the plumbing in a tone that almost had my name in it. I hear my name in most noises. That's not on the house. I wrap myself in a towel, annoyed at my own delicate ear. The binder chimed from the nightstand. It never pushed. It presented. Noise map available, it offered. The screen showed a floor plan of the house in soft gray. Circles pulsed where the binder thought sound lived. A tick at the kitchen window, a low hum near the fridge, an occasional tiny bloom at the back door. The circles were gentle enough to soothe. Hallway footfalls 10:59 to 11:01. Ignore, it advised, as if quiet hours had become a symptom. Conditioned air expands in the plenum. The word plenum is one of those specialized ones that earn trust they don't deserve. At 10:59, a single step moved in the hall, the sound of a heel that doesn't belong to you touching wood, and then not. I stayed in bed on principle, and because encouragement had turned into instruction without me noticing. The binder's helpfulness edged. If you hear a soft knock at the side door after 9:30, don't answer, it wrote in smaller text below the map. It's the neighbor's gate. There was a camera icon beside the side door on the floor plan, a tiny lens symbol. I pressed it. Live view disabled for guest privacy, it read, and beneath that, last night, Fox at 2:14 a.m. The Fox could be true. The Fox could be invented. The house had a personality, lemon oil, carefully democratic tableware, a drawer of cables that didn't tangle. It wasn't a fox. At noon, the binder added a tile to the home screen. Today's topics. I pressed it because I couldn't not. 3 cards slid into view, each with a sentence in a font friendlier than it should have been. What do you apologize for before anyone asks? Where does the hum live when the machines are off? If a door is technically yours, why does the hall decide? It was a parlor trick, that kind of intimacy, maddening and exactly good. I typed half a sentence into the provided text field like a child and then deleted it and took my work to the desk, like taking a punishment on purpose. Sometime around 5, while I was on a call with a teammate in a different time zone who speaks in talk tracks the way you might recite pledges, the binder pushed a quiet banner I couldn't ignore because it showed up on my laptop too. Back bedroom recommended tonight, it said. East room is unsettled. Vent noise forecast 3:17 to 3:23. It was the time that made me childish. I muted my mic and said to the empty room, no, which is not how adults speak to houses. The binder didn't react. It's too polite to scold. When I went to the kitchen later to make a little dinner out of a fridge I hadn't stocked because I prefer hunger to negotiation, the noise map tile pulsed, pale. Soft air returns. I didn't open it. I turned the radio to a station that played a woman insisting about wreckage over a gentle guitar, and the house let the music sit in its corners without complaint. At 9:12, the binder chimed. Wind advisory, it wrote. Please secure the back door. Latch may invite drafts if unattended. Invite is a word I use in copy when I want allow to sound less like failure. I slid the latch, which seated itself with a sound the house agreed with. I stayed in the kitchen because standing still felt like a plan. A minute later, the hedge by the fence moved in a way wind does not move a hedge. It pressed outward once, gently, as if someone testing how far a body could lean without losing balance. Then it relaxed and became a bush again. I let myself believe the binder's weather excuse because my other explanations were less manageable. The mirror in the east room caught my eye when I went to brush my teeth. It made me look too tall again. My face moved a fraction slower than I expected. The vent whispered, a sibilant, pipe-throated sound that pinned itself to 317 because the binder had done that math for me. I remembered the other place with the door that flirted with a time I hadn't chosen, and something in me stepped away like I had come to the edge of a cliff I could not see. I slept in the back room with the door half shut because deciding feels better than being told. The thing that woke me was nothing. It was the absence of the refrigerator's low grumble, the street's distant constant, the little electric buzz in the wall. A vacuum I recognized from other buildings with rules I learned the hard way. In that vacuum, a soft knock came at the side door. Once. Polite. If I had stood in the hall, I might have seen a shadow through frosted glass. I lay there and counted my breathing and told myself that ignoring is an action too. The binder chimed from across the room like approval. Excellent, it wrote to no one, and I hated it enough to consider sleeping without blankets just to be disobedient. On the last morning, the binder suggested a packing list that felt like it had been reading over my shoulder all week. Don't forget, charger under desk, sweater behind door, the tin of tea you wedged in the top cabinet so you wouldn't think about it. That last part stung, because it had felt private even when I did it, a small stealth of intention. Housekeeping will arrive at 11:05, it added. Please depart by then to reduce hallway overlap. The phrase hallway overlap shouldn't be sinister. It was. I wrote a review the way I always do when a place has treated me almost well. Great desk, thoughtful amenities, good water pressure. The digital binder is thorough. In the private feedback to the host, I tried careful. Welcome binder is extremely helpful. At times it felt predictive in a way that's unsettling. Might be worth clarifying how it learns. The host replied within minutes. So glad you enjoyed. The binder is optional. You can always minimize suggestions. It uses lie on device learning to tailor your stay. Nothing is stored beyond your visit. The words hit every checkbox in a matrix I have written many times. Optional, on device, tailor, safe. They also felt like a room arranging itself. I left early because leaving while you still feel reasonable is easier than leaving in a hurry because a house asked you to do something you don't want to explain later. I wiped down the desk with a dish rag that smelled like the bin, which felt like erasing a good sentence you didn't write. I put the tablet back the way I'd found it. When I set the folio down, the screen briefly lit with a line I didn't touch. Travel safe. Try the West Room next time. It felt like somebody who thinks they know you better than you do. I said, because I'm the sort of person who apologizes to devices, thanks, and the binder went to sleep. At home, small rectangles kept trying to be helpful in the binder's voice. A phone suggestion slid onto my lock screen at 9:12. Turn on porch light? As if the house had followed me through a pipe. The to-do app I use to make lists of groceries I only buy when I'm pretending became a little more insistent, the way an app learns your habits by punishing you with badges you didn't earn. Journal tonight? It asked at 8:50. Try. What doesn't get better when you name it? I laughed and didn't, and then wrote anyway because writing has always been the thing that makes a room less able to direct me. There are nights the hum in my apartment unthreads all at once at 10:59 as if some larger building has told my building to be quiet. In the gap I hear a soft knock from the stairwell, one single polite suggestion of a presence, and I stand very still in the kitchen and pour water into a kettle and behave like a person who has been told what not to do and is good at it. My devices are clean. That's a joke we make, meaning privacy. Tight, permission stingy, but I still hear the rhythm of an interface unscrolling when I hesitate. Back bedroom tonight, my head will offer, and I will walk into the front one just because I can, and then move my pillow at 2 a.m. because the streetlight does something to the wall that makes it look like water, and I don't like feeling navigated by headlights. A friend asked about the binder, and I tried to describe the quality of being handled, how completely benign and precisely tailored it was, how tempting to believe it knew best when it chose words like gentle and optimize and please, how kindness, repeated enough, becomes a soft wall. She said, "You can just say creepy," and I nodded and said, "Yes, okay, creepy," and knew that wasn't it. Creepy is for things with edges. This was more like being guided around the edges so you'd forget they existed. I've started resisting suggestions out loud, small hypocrisies to remind myself where my choices live. If the phone says, leave now to arrive on time, I finish my tea. If the calendar offers me focus blocks, I drag them to the wrong hour. If a smart light asks to dim, I let it, and then nudge it brighter out of spite. At night, when a sound map menaces the edges of my hearing, I tell myself it's just pipes, or neighbors, or bones settling. Sometimes I believe me. Sometimes, without a binder, my body still behaves like it's being advised. I thought for a while about writing a long letter to the host. Here is what your binder felt like. Here is the way I was handled with care, until I wasn't sure which hand was mine. I didn't write it. It would land in a queue my team might build for another team to answer with words like optional, in fonts that lift their corners, pitched smiling for compliance. Instead, I bought a paper notebook and a pen heavy enough to argue with and wrote in my own hand, tonight, back bedroom, door open, ignore soft knock, don't apologize. The next morning, I tore out the page in thrusts. Ew it away so I wouldn't confuse suggestion with law. It helped for an hour. There's a way rooms talk to you, even without tablets, where drafts decide routes and mirrors whisper about proportion and refrigerators keep time. The binder didn't invent it, it just gave it actionable bullets and a portrait orientation. Now I see prompts where there aren't any. Travel safe, try the West Room next time, my own apartment seems to say when the heat clicks and pauses. I don't argue, I just stand where I want to stand for a beat longer than is helpful. Then I move because I want to sleep, and because ignoring is an action, and because I cannot prove to you that the hedge leaned in, I can only tell you the latch sounded pleased when it seated. I rented the loft because the listing said artist's projector included, and I needed a big bright surface to rehearse the talk I kept saying wasn't finished. The building was all old industry converted into intent. Freight elevator with a scissor gate, hallways that smelled like varnish and onions, exposed brick with the kind of pride that only happens when someone has paid to uncover it. The host's photos showed a white wall cleared for projection, a short throw mounted to the ceiling like a shy animal, and a line about ambient mode perfect for installations. I told myself that meant HDMI without pain. I told myself it would help me believe my argument about anticipation, about how audiences live in the seconds before the thing, not the thing itself, wasn't just a way to explain my own inability to finish on time. The loft had the polite industrial touches you hope for. Wide plank floors, a window that faced a light well and still found a piece of sky, an HVAC vent that hummed at a steady C if you listened too long. The welcome card was exactly cheerful enough with a note about quiet hours, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. please, like sound itself. Yes. Had to sleep on schedule. The projector hung over the living area, its fan whispering a hot dust smell when I pressed the power button. The boot screen bloomed slow color bars, then an interface I recognized in the way you recognize a language you've studied just enough to be embarrassed by. HDMI 1, HDMI 2 screencast, and a smaller tile off to the side. Ambient preview, developer. The last word made me behave for a minute. I am a graduate student, which is a way of saying my job is to say what other people have already said, differently. My talk was about the aesthetics of waiting, how in early cinema the frame often held a door long before anything came through it, and how we learned to live in those seconds like they were home. It's one thing to write, attention is elastic, and another to stand in a borrowed room with a borrowed machine and ask the air to believe you. I connected my laptop and dragged my slides, the ones with 2 clean diagrams and arrows, for scale. The projector did me the favor of making everything a little too big. The keystone correction was automatic. The image squared itself as if pleased. I clicked over to the remote settings so I could shut off whatever eco mode would dim the bulb midway through my argument, and my thumb landed on ambient preview by accident. The image snapped from my slide deck to the room itself, my couch, my backpack on the arm, the white mug I'd set on the floor dangerously near the rug. The projected version of the room mapped so perfectly onto the actual room that for a second it read as a brightness adjustment. Then I saw myself in it, already walking into the frame. I hadn't moved yet. On the wall, in the image, I crossed from the kitchen island toward the couch, mug in hand. Present me watched, projected me lift the mug like a person who means to drink and then forgets to. The real mug felt heavy by my ankle. I hadn't touched it. I told myself this was a cached preview, a latency thing in reverse, the way some apps hold on to the last good frames and hallucinate continuity when the signal stutters. Time, but wrong. I stood very still. The projected me took 3 more steps, paused, looked off to the left toward the window like they'd heard the freight elevator open in the hall. Then the image shivered, the way a stream does when the buffer clears. My breath had gone shallow without asking me. I raised my real hand because you do tests when you're scared of your own imagination. The wall version didn't bother. It stayed in the future. It was only ahead by a breath. A long one maybe. 60 seconds, not 5. It's amazing how quickly you learn a number when your body decides it's important. I found the kitchen timer and set it for a minute, pressed start, and watched the projected me set the mug on the edge of the rug like a future mistake. In the actual room, I held myself still and did not. The timer counted down, smelling of old plastic, the beep as flat as a hospital monitor's. The host's binder, real paper, sat on the shelf like an anchor. Please do not alter projector developer settings, it warned, friendly. Ambient mode includes a live preview for artists to plan installations. Camera feed is local only, nothing is recorded. I wanted to be satisfied by the sentence the way you want a doctor to tell you something doesn't matter. Local only, not recorded. Preview. The words arranged themselves into the story I needed. It's a tool, and the tool is being extra. The fan lifted the tiniest lint into the beam. Particles crossed a ghost version of the room's empty space, visible only because light insisted. At 10:57, the building did a thing old buildings do. The hall went quiet all at once, like something big had cleared its throat somewhere down a vent. I could smell the projector warming too. The air, a sweet metal scent that always reads as school about to start. The image on the wall held my future, my own posture, a finger raised to scratch the back of my neck with a tired rhythm I hate seeing. I told myself to sleep and ignored myself and made coffee instead, as if adding more seconds to the room could dilute whatever the projector meant. I timed it because numbers make cages that feel like safety. I set my phone to stopwatch and clapped once loud in the actual room. On the wall, the sound arrived first. I watched the projected me flinch and look toward the door while my hands were still together. 59 seconds, 58, depending on whether I held my breath. I made a list in the notes app like it mattered. Clap, 59s. Raise left hand, 61s. Turn on lamp, 58s. I wrote projection anticipates and then hated the word because nothing was anticipating anything. It was a machine doing a trick with a camera and a loop that someone smarter than me could explain. Then the loop did something explanation didn't like. I watched projected me cross the room carrying my laptop under one arm, the mug in the other hand, shoulders set because I was rehearsing this performance of competence too often. Behind projected me, a second shape moved through the door I had not yet passed. It wasn't a person the way art makes people, no face, no features that the mind can hang itself on. It was an absence that convinced light to behave differently, a seam in the air that understood edges. If I had to call it something, I would say it was the idea of a figure. It was tall only because it made the frame tall. It followed projected me at the distance you keep when you love someone and want room to choose. In the real room, nothing crossed the threshold. The doorway was an obedient rectangle of shadow and cheap trim. My chest did that animal thing where it decides all at once to lift faster. I ran a test that felt like a deal I didn't want to beat. Just see it. Making. I stood exactly where projected me had stood when the second shape appeared and waited for the minute to come around. The air in that patch of floor was modestly colder. That's all. A small difference, like standing under a ceiling fan's outer orbit. I could smell the dust on the projector's lens when it heated up and the clean nothing of recently mopped floor. I could hear the freight elevator 2 doors down yawn through its chain and stop. In the image, the second figure moved up to the back of projected me's shoulder and inclined. The inclination read as looking, or the thought of looking. Every hair along both arms made its little decision to stand. I tried to break it. I didn't walk when the image said I would. I moved the mug to a different table and put my body on the floor like a person refusing an order, cheek against wood that smelled like a gym, waiting to feel foolish and relieved. On the wall, projected me put the mug down where I'd always put it. The second figure paused, as if deciding whether to follow my defiance or the promise of a path. I scrambled up and did anything else. Opened the window a crack, tripped on the rug, laughed too loudly with my mouth closed. 58 seconds later, a drip of coffee found the rug spot where the image had placed the mug. The source was nothing more occult than a thin lip on my mug and the way it remembers liquid at the seam. The prediction had a way of insisting even when I behaved badly. I pointed my phone camera at the wall and hit record, because proof is a talisman you can carry out of rooms. The file, when I played it back, showed the room in bad light with the tiny Twitch's phone video ads when it can't decide what to do with motion. It showed me, twice, once on the wall, once in the room. It showed nothing where the second figure had been. If anything, there was a loss of detail in that part of the frame, a compression smear that you could call artifact, or you could call a refusal to be seen. I watched it 6 times and hated the angle of my own back in 6 different ways. I messaged the host because I couldn't stand owning this alone. Hey, I wrote, ambient preview seems to be predictive. Maybe dev settings are on. It's showing me a live image that feels a minute ahead. I attached a clip that proved nothing. The host replied warmly, "The projector is part of an artist's installation. Echo mode can sometimes overlay rehearsal frames. You can disable it in settings, ambient echo. Nothing is recorded. Please don't adjust developer options." The words were reasonable. The phrase, rehearsal frames, annoyed me because it took my fear and turned it into a feature. I went into the menu and found echo, toggled it off. The wall showed my slide deck like a well-behaved rectangle. I exhaled. I looked away. When I looked back, the deck had minimized itself to a thumbnail, and the room image took its place without asking. In it, projected me had already stood up to go to the door. I stood in the doorway and did not open it. In the image, projected me did. The second figure slid past us both, as if doors are choices only for some of us. There was a sound from the hall, a bag set down, fabric whisper, the elevator thinking about breathing, and none of it was supernatural, and all of it matched the image's logic. I waited to hear knocking, or my name. There was neither. The minute tipped itself over into the next one. Real me went to the kitchen for water because behaviors borrowed from daytime can keep you safe at night. On the wall, projected, me paused in the kitchen and listened with their head tilted towards something I couldn't hear yet. When it reached me, it was only the radiator deciding on a new word for heat. The second figure never touched anything. That's worth saying. No hand on my shoulder, no mark on dust, no pressure in the way that makes you know you've been pressed. It existed better in the image than in the air, which is fine. Mages are greedy. They love to keep what they invent. When I finally turned the projector off because my heart was hitting a speed that made my vision gray at the edges, the black rectangle of its glass kept my future for me. An echo of the room in reflective black, a version of my own face waiting for my body to catch up. I slept poorly on a couch that knew too much about who I am when I'm the only person awake. I gave the talk because my discipline rewards endurance more than clarity. I stood in a too-bright room with a lectern that had been polished by nervous hands and said my sentences about pauses and thresholds and how a frame can hold the idea of someone long before they arrive. I didn't say, I watched myself arrive, and I watched someone who wasn't me arrive behind me. I didn't say, sometimes the future is less a promise than a push. People asked questions that proved they had listened. It was almost kindness. One person in the third row said, "Do you think the audience is always the second figure?" And it felt like a bell rung inside a wall, the kind you can't find later but know you heard. I didn't sleep in the loft the final night. I told the host a lie about an early train and left the key in the lockbox with my thumb pressed too long against cold metal like it could read my prints and remember me. The projector hung politely over the room as I zipped my bag, lens cap on, harmless. As I stepped into the hall, the freight elevator opened of its own timing or someone's call. The scissor gate hissed the way snakes in movies do. The light there was the color of old aspirin. I waited a minute before pressing the button out of superstition and a need to prove I wasn't being led. Then I pressed it, and that felt like obedience anyway. I tried to watch the recording again on the train. The clip that had once seemed almost convincing now looked like nothing be. You'd an exercise in bad composition. The smear where the second figure was might as well have been an artifact of compression. That's the thing about proof. It works until you need it. I deleted the video so I would stop asking it for help it couldn't give. I stopped recording things for a while after that because I didn't want more failures. At home, my cheap projector sits in a box that says fragile, and I can't bring myself to untape it. On nights when I rehearse in my head, I find myself pausing before doorways, bathroom, study, the opening into the little kitchen, and summoning a minute like a body measure. It helps to wait, and then move into the space my future self just vacated in my imagination. I don't think it changes anything. I do it anyway. Around 11 p.m., the building goes briefly careful, the heat taking a breath, the stairwell quieting like a stagehand putting a finger to their mouth. And in that clear slot, I hear a noise 2 apartments down and then from behind my own door. Hallway sounds belong to hallways until they don't. I don't open. The new habit I hate is glancing at reflective things to see if they know a minute I don't. Bus windows at night, shop fronts turn dark, the black of my monitor before it wakes. I've watched myself cross a reflection and then waited for my body to follow. Once, at a crosswalk, the glass door of a boutique showed me lifting my phone to check the time before my hand reached my coat. When I stopped and let my hand hang, a stranger came up behind me and made the same movement, and the little relief I felt was not noble. Sometimes a screen in a sports bar shows a game on a short delay, and the cheer arrives first from the room with televisions I can't see. I stand there in the doorway and feel like a person being taught how to receive news. If I were generous to the loft, I would say the projector was doing its job too well. It made the room into a rehearsal space for everything, not just art. It insisted on a cue. It left me the choice of whether to hit it. If I were generous to myself, I would admit I liked the certainty. A minute is mercifully brief and also endless when you're asking it for mercy. Sometimes I think the second figure was only a thickness of possibility made visible by light and a lens that wanted to be interesting. Sometimes I think it was the building's memory of another tenant, or the self I could have been if I had decided to go to the door when the image told me to. Once, late, alone, I thought it was you. No special you, just the composite we all carry of anyone who might be willing to cross a room behind us. I didn't write to the host about any of this beyond the polite line in the private feedback. Ambient mode feels a little too predictive, maybe warn future guests. They replied, thanks, we'll clarify the description. Echo mode is designed for artists staging processional pieces. Guests can disable it. Processional. That word sat in my mouth like a peppermint and dissolved slowly into something older. It made sense of the way the figure held distance and timing like promise. There's an impulse now to delay. I let the kettle sit on the counter and wait for the sound I heard on the wall before turning the burner. I count to 60 before I say the thing I want to say. When a knock comes softly once at my door, which it doesn't, because my friends text and my neighbors slam, I rehearse a minute of listening. Usually nothing happens at the end of it. I open the door, or I don't, and the hallway is the hallway. The projector taught me to look at the space just before an action and recognize it as a room of its own. If that's all it did, then this is an easy story. If it did more, if it showed me the person who will always be almost behind me, waiting to see which way I go, I haven't found the words for that in any discipline. I stand in the doorway a second longer. I breathe. I move. Whether I am first or second is sometimes a matter of where the light falls. I booked the cottage because the photos promised a certain plainness I could live in. Weathered clapboard under a salt-stained sky, a low stone wall that didn't intend to keep anything in or out. A window with no view except water when the tide cooperated. Windswept, the listing said, which people use when they want to romanticize inconvenience. The host mentioned fishermen in winter, seals in spring, and a wood stove I wasn't allowed to light. There was also a single line I skimmed and then circled back to with the sort of attention you give a mistake you hope is harmless. Cupboard by the hearth is locked. Please do not pry. It's old, and the paint is part of the protection. Protection for what, I thought? The varnish? I arrived with a duffel of quiet plans and a head full of things I meant to stop rehearsing. The lane down from the main road was a stitched ribbon of potholes and weeds, the kind that makes your car feel like it's apologizing with its entire chassis. The cottage leaned a little, as if the wind had been talking to it for a long time and it had started to agree. Inside, lemon oil and beeswax kept the harder smells at bay, the hint of damp in old plaster, the iron of nails in a floor that had learned too many winters. The hearth was a dark square with a forbidding grate and, tucked to its left, the cupboard. It was not pretty. A small door, chest-high, rimmed with trim that the sea had roughed up. The latch was an old iron tongue lying flat, no padlock, nothing dramatic, just layers of paint that had been applied and applied and applied until they built a seam like a healed scar. The brushstrokes overlapped at the edges the way people overlap when they mean to keep each other. I ran my fingers along the paint ridges. They were smooth under the wax, but the hinge pins were rusted in a way that told me whoever painted had made the decision to paint. Them shut on purpose. The binder on the table used the polite tone these places all adopt. Quiet hours, 10 p.m., 7 a.m., wind notwithstanding. Please keep shutters latched if away from the cottage. Fishing gear and shed is not for guest use. The last line. Again, the cupboard by the hearth is for owners only. Do not pry. It made me think of pious phrases. Do not steal, do not covet, do not pry. I laughed out loud at my own doctored commandments and then felt bad, like I was missing the point. There was a guest book by the window, the kind with a pressed sprig of something brittle tucked in the first page. Handwriting wandered across the entries. Summer couples praising sunsets, a family rescuing a crab with a plastic shovel, an older pair who seemed to exist entirely to praise each other's ability to build a fire the old way. The last page had only a half line. Listen at evening. You'll... The rest of the sentence had been crossed out with a firm pencil twice, like a throat clearing into silence. I walked the strand before dusk, the wind pushing at my jacket and my thoughts. The beach was made of down-shouldered stones. When the waves came in, they scruffed against each other like beads in a jar. I picked up a black limpet shell because it fit my thumb as if it had been carved to do so. I told myself I'd leave it here when I left. as if the sea were keeping receipts. The sun went red behind a cloud, and then the cloud shrugged like it didn't care. Inside again, kettle on, I kept half an eye on the cupboard, as if ignoring it too visibly would count as interest. After the sun went soft and down behind the headland, the air in the room changed. Not colder exactly. Heavier, the way a room gets before rain when wood decides to remember its tree. The cupboard made a sound like a board settling, then, very gently, a second sound, not a knock, a pulse, a little give and take. Ache of wood against frame, almost like breath. When I stepped closer, the smell came up to meet me. Wet timber, not rot, something clean that had soaked a long time and then returned. Rain-soaked, salt-rinsed. The seam of paint along the bottom looked darker, as if the grain beneath was pulling damp in through a memory. The kettle sang its thin hospital whistle, and I poured water over tea like that could drown a question. The pulse quieted to an occasional thought. I read the binder again and then the rules about shutters before my head invented ways to make them useful. The night got loud with the kind of wind that puts a letter opener sound under the eaves. I told myself that everything old makes noises the first night. Floors stretch. Windows bargain with their frames. Wood breathes. I didn't have a word yet for a cupboard that seemed to decide sunset was its cue. The second evening, it didn't wait for me to be ready. I sat at the little table with my bowl and the cheap bread the village shop keeps for people who forgot to bring anything. The sea was a cold sheet. The clouds above it looked like things that had survived worse. Wind worried the shutter hinges a little, but the latch held and the candle did its job of making walls look closer. The cupboard answered the dark with its small rhythm, wood flexing against paint, paint refusing with patience. If the tide had a hand, it would have been knocking along the seam from the other side. The damp smell arrived again, cleaner than the room, like a set of wet clothes hung by a fire in a house that belongs to people. I put my ear to the panel because the line between investigation and rudeness is thinner at a certain hour. The wood was cool. Behind it, close, something like a drop fell, not water finding a bucket. The sound of stones rolled on each other, the exact noise the beach makes when waves eat and swallow their gifts. A wash of air followed it, not breeze, just the press of a space. It smelled like kelp and rope and the kind of tar boats used to wear before we all decided gloss looked like say, fitty. The guest book had a new page, then I could swear wasn't there. It lay open where I'd left it closed. A date at the top that didn't belong to that day or any day I'd lived yet, 2 days forward. Underneath, my name in my own hand. I know my loops and my stingy way with tails. The capital I draw for my name has a tilt nothing can imitate. The entry was short. Woke to the latch humming. Do not pry. Put back what the water turns up. A small drawing under it, a little oval inside a bigger one, the limpet shell, a quick child's line. I ran my fingers over the pencil and felt the graphite sit on paper like an animal pretending to sleep. I went to the sink, tipped my coat pocket, and the black limpet shell hit the enamel with a clack that sounded louder than it deserved to be. There are rational explanations for finding your own handwriting where you don't remember putting it. Sleep, mischief. An earlier trip, blurred by too much weather. Software disguised as paper is the trick of the era. But this book was a physical thing. The edges were frayed, the sort of paper you can get a good paper cut from, the kind that holds a groove when you press too hard. I picked it up, lightheaded, and turned it sideways, like Angle might talk sense into it. The last entry before mine, before the future mine, was a stranger's note about moths bumping against the lampshade, their short sort of despair. Do not pry, the binder had said. It's one thing to be told. It's another to be told by yourself. I put the shell on top of the cupboard as if that counted as returning it to anywhere. The pulse slowed for a few seconds the way a room calms when someone you love arrives. I wanted to perform belief for whatever listened. Then the tiny motion returned, polite, and a darker wet marked the paint seam at the base, as if something inside the cavity had leaned and shared itself into the room. I tested the latch because the human hand is an idiot that way. It lifted a 1/4 inch, then refused under paint that had set like enamel. No give. The brush strokes around the edge swallowed the metal like icing. Where the paint had bubbled, faint fissures showed what might have been letters, or a grain that enjoyed looking like letters. If you wanted to see words, you could pick them out. Hold, or home, or hush. I told myself to stop reading into wood. I told myself to get a towel for the small wet. I found one under the sink that had been laundered with something kind. It smelled of dried sun. I pressed it against the base of the cupboard, more gesture than function. Damp bled into it slowly, like a bruise appearing. A single sound from outside cut through, someone whistling a tune I knew but couldn't name, coming from the direction of the path toward the headland. A gull answered rudely. I went to the window and saw nothing on the track but the kind of grass that keeps its own counsel. When I turned back, the guest book lay open again with a new line under my own. Don't look out after dusk. Do not ask the path for company. The letters were the same as before. The impulse to argue with myself felt childish and useless. I slept badly with the candle wearing itself down and the kettle cooling to a sound like breath slipping under a door. Sometime between one and whatever came after it, a stuttering series of taps printed themselves on the inside of the cupboard, not desperate, just consistent, like pebbles thrown in small handfuls not to wake but to ask. Each little run ended with a long, low breath of the wood, swelling. The smell was a memory of rain on summer boards. Within it, a salt that made me think of the time I leaned into a wave and got my mouth wrong. The storm came on the third day not like a drama, but like a certainty. The sky was a piece of slate knob. Odie had chalked yet. The lane down toward the village was a brown ribbon of water and sand, the hedges shining with a skin of rain. The binder had a new page I swear I hadn't turned to, a storm checklist with gentle orders. Latch shutters. Bring in the outside chair if it is still there. It rarely is. Put a towel by the door to catch the draft. Ignore knocks. It's the latch learning. I made the cottage small in the way you do when weather writes your perimeter. The guest book had dated me again today by tomorrow's name. The road will be closed by the pub for an hour. Don't go out. The cupboard will sound like breathing. Do not paint scrape. Leave the shell. The drawing this time was taller. 3 vertical strokes and a short one crossing. It could have been tally marks. It could have been a gate. The pencil pressure was less certain. Mine on a day my sleep wasn't good. At some point, no longer sure of hours, I did the worst simple thing. I picked at a lifted paint curl at the cupboard's lower edge. The flake came off with the resistance of a bandage that has decided skin belongs to it. Behind the paint, cool wood, and in the wood the narrow old shape of a keyhole, stuffed with paint and years. I touched it and felt a cool that was not room cool but stone or sea cool, a stored temperature. The cupboard exhaled in one soft effort and a drop of clean water formed at the keyhole's lip. It slid down my fingertip and wasn't salt when I tasted it. It was rain, sweet in the way old rain is. I said, "I'm sorry" to the door. Ridiculous, then necessary. I put the black limpet shell into the keyhole because I did not have a key and because the drawing had felt like instruction, and because the idea had sat in my mouth like a word I hadn't said yet. The shell wedged gently as if made to sit there. For a long minute nothing changed, and then the pulse behind the wood evened. The way a breathing body finds a rhythm beside another. I sat on the hearthstone and watched the paint seam where damp had darkened it lighten by a degree a person could only see if they'd been waiting for it. The pantry clock did its little plastic seconds and the wind outside softened to register. Any other changes were in me. I did not open the door. I do not know what would have come out or whether that's the right word. I slept with the wind making small tongues of noise where the shutter met the sill, and the cupboard doing the lightest push-pull against itself, as if waves had decided to rest under that hinge. In the morning, the road was passable, the lane a braid of sand and tracks. I made my tea and found sand in the kettle, a grain or two at the bottom that hadn't been there when I wiped it dry. The guest book, when I lifted it, presented me my own entry in my own hand, dated that day at a time just after now. "Thank you," it said, a sentence I never use without thinking. "Leave before the noon ferry. Don't look back at the path. Return things that don't belong to you. Don't keep the extra." I didn't know what the extra meant until I reached into my coat and found a second shell, the twin of the black limpet I'd used, warm from my body and wrong in my pocket like picking up the wrong keys. I set it on the mantel beside the little jar of matches that weren't for me, and felt the room get relieved in the smallest way, the way a strung thread will relax when you take your finger off it. I messaged the host a normal message because normality is a kindness. "Lovely place. The cupboard's paint looks like it's swelling a little in the damp. You might want to check it before it flakes." The host replied, "Thanks for minding it. It's old. Best not to pick. It holds better closed." I couldn't tell if the "it" was the cupboard or the house or something one layer down. I left before the noon ferry without being a princess. On Who Asks Islands what their plans are. Back home, when rain starts a certain way, my kitchen cabinets exhale a breath that is not sound and I feel it against my wrist. Not an open, not a draft, a memory of wood learning water and water learning back. Sometimes there's a tiny tapping between the studs at the hour the tide I can't see in a city thousands of miles from that shore is making its mind up. I keep a bowl of small stones on the table now, just city smooth, river creased, because there's a part of me that likes to put things back. When a pocket offers up a shell I didn't know I was carrying, I put it near a window and don't take it with me when I go. If you want a clean version, here it is. Old houses creak, rain swells wood, salt gets under paint, and grief teaches you to talk to things that don't answer. If you want the other version, it's the same with a cupboard that breathes like a tide under your hand and a book that lets you borrow tomorrow long enough to do the right thing. I don't open cabinets quickly anymore. I don't look out at paths after dusk. And when a seam in paint darkens by a shade only, I will see. I touch it with 2 fingers like a person greeting something that shouldn't be a guest and somehow is